How did chance save you from being killed? It was just another day at my job as a security guard at a rough mall. I had no idea it would turn into a nightmare. 2 weeks earlier, I caught a guy stealing. He turned out to be part of a dangerous gang called the United Bloods Nation. When the cops showed up, he and his crew swore they'd get revenge on me. Fast forward to that fateful day. I was chatting with a guy who sold toy planes near the front door. Suddenly, a car pulled up. The windows rolled down. That's when all hell broke loose. Gunshots rang out. Without thinking, I shoved the toy seller to the ground. I pulled out my gun and started shooting back. It was chaos, screaming, gunfire, the smell of blood. My mind went blank, but my body kept moving. I had tons of bullets and a bulletproof vest. Thank goodness for that vest. I kept shooting and shooting at the car. It felt like it would never end. Finally, the car sped off. I thought it was over, but that the real horror was just beginning. A mom started screaming that her 9-year-old had been shot. I rushed over and saw blood pouring from the poor kid's neck. I tried to stop the bleeding, but it was too late. The light faded from her eyes. The ambulance and police showed up. An old cop buddy yelled at me to check myself. That's when I realized I'd been shot too. 3 times, once in the arm and twice in my vest. The next thing I knew, I was in the hospital. They told me later I'd been there for 2 weeks, but I don't remember any of it. Apparently, the DA called me a hero, but I don't feel like one. They say I killed one of the bad guys, but all I can think about is that little girl who died. I am alive, but I feel like I failed at my job. The only silver lining, those gangsters couldn't aim very well. If they could, I might not be here to tell this story.
Story 2.
One hot afternoon, I noticed a van parked across the street. A man called out to me, asking if I'd seen his lost dog. He seemed worried and asked if I could help him look for it. Now, I was just a kid who loved animals. I didn't think twice about helping someone find their pet, so I started walking towards his van, ready to be a hero and find that lost dog. But then, something crazy happened. Our neighbor, this older lady who always seemed to be watching out her window, came flying out of her house like a bat out of hell. She was screaming and yelling, telling the guy to get lost. The man in the van, he took off so fast you'd think the devil was chasing him. At the time, I was confused. I thought our neighbor had scared away a nice man who just wanted help finding his dog. It wasn't until years later that it hit me. That nice man probably didn't have a dog at all. He might have been trying to kidnap me. Looking back, I realized how close I came to being one of those missing kids on the news, all because I was too young to see the danger. I used to live just outside of downtown. My friend lived in the city center, in a place where he couldn't have overnight guests, so every time I visited, I'd have to leave around 10 p.m. to catch the bus home. One night, I got to my usual bus stop and felt a chill run down my spine. All the streetlights were out. It was pitch black and creepy. My gut told me to walk to the next stop. Little did I know that decision would almost cost me my life. When I got to the next stop, I saw an old man sitting there. He looked out of it, probably drunk or high. As soon as he saw me, he started saying gross things, trying to hit on me. I tried to ignore him, hoping he'd leave me alone. Big mistake. He got mad when I didn't respond. He started yelling, calling me awful names. Then, out of nowhere, he jumped up. I could see the rage in his eyes. I turned to run, but I wasn't fast enough. He grabbed my hair, yanking me back. His fist came out of nowhere, smashing into my face. We tumbled to the ground. That's when things got really scary. He started slamming my head against the concrete. Again and again. It felt like my skull was going to crack open. I was so shocked I couldn't even scream. All I could do was try to fight back, but he was so much stronger. Just when I thought it was over, that this was how I was going to die, something amazing happened. A group of guys came out of nowhere. They pulled the old man off me and held him down. Someone called the police. I was saved, but just barely. If those guys hadn't shown up when they did, I probably wouldn't be here to tell this story. The old man wasn't stopping. He would have kept going until, well, the worst part, I was so shaken up by what happened I couldn't bring myself to go to court when they charged him. Because of that, he only spent 3 months in jail. Sometimes I still have nightmares about that night. But mostly, I'm just grateful to be alive. And now, I always trust my gut when something feels off. It might just save my life. Again.
Story 3.
I was only 10 when I met my grandfather for what would be the last time. I barely knew him. The last time we'd met, I was just a baby. He was dying in the hospital, his heart giving out and his mind slipping away. My dad never liked him and refused to come with us. It was just me and my mom walking into that cold white hospital room. There he was, this stranger who was supposed to be my grandpa, lying still in his bed. Mom went up to him first, whispering something I couldn't hear. I hung back, scared of this creepy old man I'd never really known. Mom said I should say something nice to him. I didn't want to, but I could see how sad she was. So I slowly walked up to his bed. He looked asleep, so I leaned in close and started whispering some nice things, just like Mom did. That's when it happened. Mid-sentence, his eyes flew open. They locked onto mine, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It was pure hatred. Before I could even blink, he shot up in bed. His hands grabbed my throat, squeezing tight. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could hear was him screaming, "Fucking betrayal, you betray me." Mom was yelling for a nurse. I was terrified, confused, and gasping for air. And then, just as quickly as it started, it was over. His grip loosened, and he fell back onto the bed. The heart monitor made that long, flat beep you hear in movies. He was gone. Mom was a mess, crying her eyes out. I was in shock, tears rolling down my face. I didn't understand what had just happened. Later, a nurse told us that Grandpa's mind was pretty much gone. She said he probably thought I was someone else when he attacked me. Years later, I learned the whole truth. Mom thought Grandpa had seen my dad in me. See, my dad was a mean drunk who treated us badly when I was little. Grandpa hated him for it. Turns out, I look a lot like my dad. And in his last moments, that's who Grandpa thought he was strangling. Talk about bad luck. Looking like the wrong person almost got me killed by my own grandfather. It's a day I'll never forget, no matter how hard I try.
Story 4.
When I was 14, I thought I'd scored the deal of a lifetime, a cheap second-hand guitar I found online. The seller went to my school, so I figured it was safe to check it out. Boy, was I wrong. I showed up at his house, excited to see my new guitar. But there was a problem, no strings. The seller had a solution. If I went downtown with him to buy new strings, he'd put them on for free. Seemed fair, right? So off we went, 2 kids on a mission. We got the strings and started heading back. That's when things went sideways. This random guy comes up to us asking for money. I tried to ignore him, but then I saw something that made my heart stop, a gun. He was pointing it right at us. The guy starts yelling about how he owns this part of town. Said we had to pay him just to walk through. Can you believe it? I was frozen, my mind racing. But the guitar seller? He was braver than me. He started arguing with the guy, gun and all. While they were going at it, he turned to me and whispered one word, "Run." I didn't need to be told twice. My legs started moving before my brain could catch up. I bolted into the street, dodging cars left and right. Looking back, it was pretty stupid. I could have been hit, but fear does funny things to you. As I ran, I kept waiting to hear a gunshot. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. But the shot never came. I don't know what happened to the guitar seller. I hope he made it out okay. All I know is that my great deal almost got me killed. These days, I stick to buying guitars from stores. It might cost more, but at least I don't have to outrun any bullets.
Story 5.
My dad's got this client who owns a bunch of fast food places. One day, while we were fixing up one of his restaurants, he told us a story that gave me chills. See, when this guy was just starting out in the fast food world, he was working as an assistant manager in Colorado. His job made him wear a tie every day. Little did he know that tie would end up saving his life. One night, a guy high on drugs burst into the restaurant. He wasn't there for a burger, he wanted cash. Before anyone could react, he grabbed my dad's client from behind and pressed a knife against his throat. Heart racing, the client opened the cash register. He thought that would be the end of it. But the druggie had other plans. He tried to cut the client's throat anyway. Here's where luck stepped in. That knife? It was as dull as a butter knife. And that tie the client had to wear? It was just thick enough that the blade couldn't cut through. Realizing he wasn't dead, the client started fighting back. It was like something out of an action movie. He managed to break free and escape with only a few scratches. The would-be killer? He ended up behind bars. But the real star of the story, that tie. The client kept it as a reminder of how close he came to death. He's got it framed at home now, like a trophy. Talk about a close shave. Who would have thought a boring work uniform could be a lifesaver? I bet that client never complained about having to wear a tie again. It just goes to show, you never know what might save your life one day. Could be a tie, could be pure luck. Either way, I'm betting that client counts his blessings every time he sees that framed tie on his wall.
Story 6.
My life almost ended before it really began. I was just a baby, not even 2 years old, when my birth mother tried to kill me. She'd put me on life insurance, pretending it was to take care of me. But her real plan was much darker. When I was 18 months old, she shook me so hard my brain swelled up. My eyes were bleeding. The pain must have been awful. It's called shaken baby syndrome. Sounds almost innocent, doesn't it? But it's anything but that. My dad was in prison at the time. When she brought me to visit him, he noticed something was wrong right away. My head was huge, swollen like a balloon. He asked her about it, but she lied. She knew exactly what she'd done. After we left, my dad told a guard to call the police. He might have saved my life that day. I ended up in the ICU for kids. When the doctor saw me, they called Child Protective Services right away. I could have ended up in foster care, but my aunt swooped in like a superhero. She fought for me and won. Now, she's the only mom I've ever really known. My birth mother, she went to jail. But that wasn't the end of it. When I was 3, she got out and tried to beat me with a board with a nail in it. Can you imagine? Back to jail she went. Now she's a crack addict, but that doesn't stop her from trying to worm her way back into my life. When I was 16, she showed up with a bunch of lies. She promised me a car, said she loved me, blamed everything on my dad. I fell for it and met her at a pizza place. But it was all fake. She denied everything she'd said before. The last time I saw her, I'd just gotten my first job. She tried to act all nice like nothing had ever happened, but I was done. I looked at her like she was a stranger and told her to get lost. Some people say you can't choose your family, but I did. I chose the aunt who saved me, the one I call Mom. As for my birth mother, she's just a bad memory now. I don't know if this counts as luck saving my life. Maybe it was my dad's quick thinking or my aunt's love. But I do know one thing. I'm lucky to be alive, and I don't take that for granted.
Story 11.
Back in the 90s, I was working as a bouncer at this club in Louisiana. One night, these tough-looking guys show up. They're clearly in a gang, and they're not happy when we try to check them for weapons. They start throwing threats around, giving us these crazy, murderous looks. We call those Manson lamps in the business. Eventually they leave, but not before promising all sorts of trouble. As the night goes on, things slow down. We've got too many staff and not enough customers, so I figure it's okay to have a few drinks. I'm not wasted, but I'm definitely feeling sleepy and buzzed. I tell my buddy I'm gonna take a nap in the back of his car. I'm out cold for a few minutes when nature calls. I stumble out of the car, looking for a place to pee. I find a spot between a guard booth and a building, about 25 feet from the club entrance. There are people hanging around outside the club, but I figure I've got enough privacy here. I'm in the middle of doing my business when suddenly, this guy comes tearing past me. He runs around the guard booth behind me, pulls out a gun, and starts blasting away at the car I just left. Bam, 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 the noise is deafening. I'm frozen in shock, my mind trying to process what's happening. The guy empties his entire clip into the back seat of the car. Then, just as quickly as he appeared, he turns and runs right past me again. He disappears down the alley into the night. I don't think he even saw me standing there, pants still unzipped, mouth hanging open in disbelief. Later, we found out it was a 9mm. There were bullet holes all over the back seat, trunk, roof, and bumper of the car. Surprisingly, nothing much came of it. Well, except for one thing. My partner was convinced I had a target on my back. He wouldn't come near me for a whole year after that. Looking back, I realize how close I came to being in that car when the bullets started flying. If I hadn't needed to pee at that exact moment, well, let's just say I'm glad I had a small bladder that night. It's funny how life works sometimes. One minute you're just a bouncer having a few drinks, the next you're witnessing a drive-by shooting meant for you. And all because you needed to take a leak. Talk about a close call.
Story 7.
10 years ago, I was living in a 3-bedroom apartment with my buddy. We had a spare room, and my friend met this older guy who translated philosophy books. He seemed nice enough, so we decided to let him move in. Extra cash is always good, right? Wrong. This decision almost cost me my life. The new guy was super quiet, always keeping to himself. I hardly ever saw him, but something about him just felt off. You know that feeling in your gut when something's not right? Yeah, I had that big time. One day I had to go to work way earlier than usual. I got dressed and left while both my roommates were still out. No big deal, right? My meeting finished early, so I decided to head home for lunch. As I got to my building, I knew something was wrong. There was a fire truck outside, and the doorman came running up to me, panic written all over his face. "There's a gas leak in your apartment," he shouted. "We had to shut off the gas to the whole building. We were about to break down your door." My heart started racing. A gas leak? How? The moment I stepped into the apartment, the smell hit me like a truck. It was so strong I could barely breathe. I ran to the kitchen and saw something that made my blood run cold. Every single valve on the stove was wide open. With shaking hands, I called my friend. He tried to reach our new roommate, but the guy wasn't picking up. That's when I checked his room. Empty. Completely cleared out. The guy had packed up and disappeared. That's when it hit me. This wasn't an accident. This guy, this stranger we'd let into our home, had tried to kill me in my sleep. If I hadn't had that early meeting, I don't even want to think about what could have happened. We never heard from him again. To this day, I don't know why he did it. Was he just crazy? Did he have some twisted reason? I'll never know. But I do know one thing. I'm a lot more careful about who I let into my life now. And I always double-check the stove before I leave the house. Sometimes I wonder where that guy is now. Is he out there trying the same thing on someone else? I hope not, but mostly I'm just grateful to be alive. It's crazy to think how close I came to never waking up again. All because we wanted to make a little extra cash on a spare room.
Story 8.
I'm a lawyer who defends people accused of crimes. This story is so wild it made the news, so I'm not using my real name. I had this client once, let's call him Mr. Trouble. He was in a world of hurt. He'd stolen almost $500,000 from his business partner, The government had taken a bunch of his stuff. He owed over $2 million to people he'd borrowed from, and to top it all off, he was going through a nasty divorce and couldn't even see his kids. Things were so bad, Mr. Trouble needed 3 lawyers. Me for the criminal stuff, one for money issues, and another for the divorce. He was a mess, drinking too much and doing cocaine. He'd call me in the middle of the night, sometimes yelling, sometimes crying. It was exhausting. One day, Mr. Trouble came to my office looking for me. Lucky for me, I was in court that day. My secretary said he seemed perfectly normal when he left, but then things took a dark turn. Mr. Trouble went straight from my office to his divorce lawyer's place, and he did something unthinkable. He shot and killed the lawyer. The police caught up with him pretty quick. There was a shootout, and Mr. Trouble got hurt. But here's the really scary part. He later told the cops that he had come to my office to shoot me that day. He was planning to kill his other lawyer too. I can't help but think about how close I came to being murdered that day. If I hadn't been in court, it could have been me instead of the divorce lawyer. It's chilling to think about. This job can be dangerous sometimes. You never know what a desperate person might do. But I never thought I'd come so close to being killed by my own client. I often wonder, what if I had been in my office that day? Would I have been able to talk him down, or would I have become another victim? It's a sobering reminder that in this line of work, you're not just dealing with cases, you're dealing with people's lives, and sometimes those lives can take a very dark turn. Every time I think about it, I get goosebumps. I was just doing my job, trying to help this guy, and I almost paid for it with my life. Talk about a close call.
Story 9.
When I was just 3 years old, my own father tried to kill me. He threw me into a 6-foot deep pool and watched me drown. I can still remember it, even now. The panic, the struggle, the world going dark. For 90 seconds, I was dead. If it wasn't for my mom finding me and bringing me back, I wouldn't be here today. I was murdered by my own father, then reset like some kind of video game character. That moment changed me forever. To this day, I can't stand water on my face. Some fears never leave you, no matter how much time passes. But that was just the beginning of my nightmare. My childhood was a horror movie. Every night I'd fall asleep to the sounds of my parents fighting, things breaking, my father hitting my mom. Her screams became my lullaby. When I was 4, I walked in on him strangling her. He was so much bigger, she didn't stand a chance. But somehow she survived. She always did. That's when he started on me. Beatings for the smallest mistakes. A broken record player needle earned me the belt, slaps, punches, and worse. One night, not long after my mom had major surgery, I woke up to screams unlike any before. I saw my father raping my mom in the living room. There was so much blood. I stood there, frozen for what felt like forever. After that, he started interfering with me too. I can't bring myself to describe it. Whatever awful thing you're imagining, you're probably right. This was my life until I was 9. Beatings, rape, torture, burns, neglect, all at the hands of the man who was supposed to protect me. We finally escaped when I was 9, but the nightmare didn't end. There were death threats, stalking, police, lawyers. We went into hiding. I turned to drugs and alcohol to cope, tried to end my life more than once. Just when things started to get better, my mom had an accident. She fell into a coma and lost over a decade of memories. When she woke up, she thought I was 7 years old. She didn't remember any of the abuse. I put my life on hold for years to help her recover, to help her become herself again. It's been a long, hard road, but I'm still here. I survived. I'm more than what happened to me. Every day I'm alive is a victory over the man who tried to kill me when I was just a toddler. Every smile, every moment of joy is a middle finger to the darkness of my past. I'm not just a survivor. I'm a warrior, and my story isn't over yet.
Story 10.
I have a friend who had a party at his parents' house when he was in high school that a ton of random people went to. He got super drunk during the party and went upstairs to go to sleep, knowing that his friends would watch the party for him. My friend woke up from his nap to a guy from his school sitting on top of him, stabbing him to death. He was stabbed 7 times before it stopped, and he laid there on the bed, dying. The only reason he is still alive is because his best friend came upstairs to ask him if it was all right if he made a frozen pizza and found him. The assailant was put in jail and recently was released, and it scares me to know that a guy who wanted to know what it would feel like to kill someone said during the trial is still out there free.
Story 11.
Our neighbors when I was growing up had 3 kids the same ages as myself and my siblings. We were all friends and got along well for the most part. Their eldest child, I'll call him Peter, has Asperger's syndrome and was known to have outbursts that would sometimes be violent. One day, when I was 5 or 6, our mothers decided to take all 6 of us to a nearby wading pool because it was hot out. Well, due to that, it was pretty busy, and there were a lot of other kids. There were 2 lifeguards there, but were generally too busy chatting with each other to be doing their jobs, as my mother later tells me. I was off with my neighbor's daughter, was my age, and Peter. I don't remember why, but he suddenly flew into a fit and decided that I was at fault for something. He, being about 8 and a lot bigger than me, grabs my head and holds it under the water. I remember that. I remember not being able to breathe. I remember clearly thinking that I needed air or I was going to die. I remember fighting, but not being strong enough to get him off of me. Then I remember my mom's face. She had a clear look of both terror and fury. I remember looking over and seeing Peter sitting with his arms around his knees, rocking back and forth as his mother tried to calm him down. Then I remember my mom absolutely losing it on the lifeguards who had missed everything and were clueless as to why this tiny woman was screaming at them that her daughter had almost drowned on their watch. To this day, I have a fear of swimming and absolutely do not like having water on my face, even when I'm showering. Here's a combined, more dramatic version of these 2 stories, using simpler language and focusing on the theme of near-death experiences. Sometimes, the people who almost kill you are the ones you least expect.
Story 12.
I had a friend in high school who threw a big party at his parents' house. Lots of strangers showed up. My friend got super drunk and went upstairs to sleep it off, thinking his buddies would keep an eye on things. He woke up to a nightmare. There was a guy from school sitting on top of him, stabbing him over and over. 7 times the knife plunged into his body. My friend lay there, feeling his life drain away. The only reason he's alive today? His best friend came upstairs to ask about making a frozen pizza. Talk about being in the right place at the right time. The guy who did it? He told the court he wanted to know what it would feel like to kill someone. He's out of jail now, walking around free. It makes my skin crawl just thinking about it. But that's not the only close call I know about. When I was little, we had neighbors with 3 kids. The oldest, let's call him Peter, had Asperger's syndrome. Sometimes he'd have violent outbursts. One hot day, our moms took us all to a wading pool. It was crowded, and the lifeguards were too busy flirting to do their jobs. I was playing with Peter and his sister when suddenly something set him off. He grabbed my head and shoved it underwater. I can still remember the panic, the desperate need for air, fighting with all my strength, but not being able to break free. I really thought I was going to die. Then, like an angel, my mom's face appeared. She looked terrified and furious all at once. She pulled me out, saving my life. I remember seeing Peter rocking back and forth while his mom tried to calm him down. And I remember my tiny mom screaming at those clueless lifeguards, telling them I almost drowned on their watch. To this day, I'm scared of swimming. I don't even like water on my face when I shower. It's crazy how fast life can change. One minute you're at a party or playing in a pool, the next you're fighting for your life. And sometimes the danger comes from people you know, people you should be able to trust.
Story 12.
It was a dark and rainy night when my luck saved my life. I was in college in a foreign country, taking the last bus back to my dorm. The busy rush hour was over, and I was the only passenger left. As we drove through the darkness, I started to feel uneasy. The driver was acting weird, and suddenly he turned onto a dark, grassy hill. He claimed there was a problem with the tires, but I didn't buy it. I told him I wanted to get off, but he wouldn't let me. My heart started racing. I knew this hill led to a dangerous cliff where bad things had happened before. I gripped my umbrella tightly, ready to use its sharp point to defend myself if I had to. The driver reached out to grab me, but I was quicker. In a split second, I made a risky choice. I jumped out of the moving bus. I ran as fast as I could through the tall grass, heading straight for the highway. Luckily, another bus was passing by. The driver looked shocked to see a girl burst out of the darkness. As I climbed aboard, I saw my attacker speed away into the night. There was nothing wrong with his tires after all. That night, my quick thinking and a bit of luck saved me from becoming another victim on that lonely cliff. It's a night I'll never forget, and a reminder to always trust your instincts.
Story 13.
It was supposed to be a fun day out, celebrating my friend's 14th birthday. I was only 12 and I looked up to him. But I didn't know that this day would turn into a nightmare I'd never forget. We went on a hike, just the two of us. Everything seemed normal at first, but then he suggested we take a different path. Before I knew it, we were standing at the edge of a steep cliff. That's when it happened. He pushed me off. As I fell, time seemed to slow down. I thought this was the end, but then, by some miracle, I grabbed onto something. It was a tree root sticking out of the cliff face. This tree had grown in just the right spot, and its root was like a lifeline reaching out to save me. My so-called friend didn't even check to see what happened. He just walked away, leaving me hanging there, scared out of my mind. I clung to that root for what felt like forever. My arms ached, and I was terrified of falling. After about an hour, someone finally heard me yelling for help. They managed to pull me back up to safety. I was shaking and crying, but I was alive. To this day, I still have bad dreams about falling off that cliff. I never understood why he did it. Looking back, I can see now that he had been mean to me for a long time, but pushing someone off a cliff? That's beyond mean. It's crazy. That tree root was my lucky charm that day. Without it, I might not be here to tell this story.
Story 14.
It was just another night in college when my life took a terrifying turn. I stopped at a gas station, not knowing it would become the scariest moment of my life. My car had broken locks, which I hadn't fixed yet. Big mistake. As soon as I got back in, a strange man jumped into the passenger seat. He told me to drive to an ATM. I was so scared I couldn't think straight. This guy was weird. He said he worked at Wendy's and promised me free food for life if I helped him. Yeah, right. On the way at the moment he showed me pictures of his daughters on a phone that was obviously stolen. Things got even weirder when a Whitney Houston song came on the radio. The guy started crying like crazy, yelling about how only good people die and bad things should only happen to bad people. I was freaking out inside but tried to stay calm. At the moment I took out cash and gave it to him. I thought it was over, but no such luck. He made me drive again, and as we passed some train tracks, I was sure this was where I'd die. Then he asked what I was studying. When I said biochemistry, he went off about jet propulsion and aliens. "We are not alone," he yelled. "Aliens are among us." Finally, we pulled into another gas station. To my surprise, he told me to drive away. I couldn't believe it was over. I called the cops right away and had to do a lineup. Turns out, this guy had done this to lots of other women. Some weren't as lucky as me. Looking back, I realized how close I came to something much worse.
Story 15.
When I was about 10, my family went on a safari trip to Tanzania. It was supposed to be an exciting adventure, but one night it turned into a nightmare we'll never forget. We were near the Kenyan border, looking for cute little bush babies in the dark. Suddenly, a truck appeared and blocked our car. A bunch of guys with big guns jumped out. Our tour guide got really nervous, putting his head down on the steering wheel. I didn't understand what was happening and asked questions, but my parents told me to be quiet and stay low. I could tell they were scared. My mom later told me she saw the men staring at her and my sister in a creepy way. For what felt like forever, but was probably about 10 minutes, these guys kept asking our guide questions. He just mumbled answers without looking up. Finally, they put their guns down and drove away. We were all shaking with fear. When we asked our guide what happened, he tried to tell us they were just game wardens looking for poachers. But we knew that wasn't true. Later, my parents found out the truth. These guys were part of a Kenyan gang that kidnaps tourists for ransom. They stop one group and call the park owner, saying they'll let us go if he pays up. If he doesn't, they hurt the tourists and try again with the next group. We were lucky they let us go. Weirdly enough, our family has had a lot of close calls on trips. In Israel and Egypt, we nearly got caught in bomb blasts. In South Africa, we got stuck with an angry hippo in a river and had a leopard stalking us. I even accidentally put my face near a dangerous snake in Tanzania. Now it's like a family joke. Whenever we go on a trip, we expect something crazy to happen. Our friends always ask, what went wrong this time when we get back?
Story 16.
It was just another night when my brother and I decided to walk our dog. No big deal, right? Wrong. This ordinary walk turned into something straight out of a horror movie. It was around 11 p.m. when we left through our side gate. We live on a corner so we can see down both streets. As soon as we stepped out, I spotted this weird-looking guy at the corner. He was walking towards us, but something about him just felt off. My gut was screaming at me that something wasn't right. I quickly told my brother to grab the dog and get back inside. This dude was getting closer, walking all funny, like he was trying to hide something behind his back. As I was shoving my brother through the gate, the guy called out to us. "Oi mate, can I come in?" he said. "I need a blanket, I'm freezing." Yeah, right. I didn't say a word. We just got inside and locked the door as fast as we could. A little while later, our phone rang. It was our neighbors from 2 doors down. Turns out, the same creepy guy had knocked on their door. Their 10-year-old son answered, and guess what? The weirdo was holding a hatchet. I can't stop thinking about what could have happened if we'd stayed outside or if I hadn't trusted my instincts. That night taught me a big lesson. Always trust your gut feeling. It might just save your life. Now, whenever we walk the dog at night, we're extra careful. And you bet we always check who's at the door before opening it. Sometimes a little paranoia can be a good thing.
Story 17.
When I was 15, my life changed in an instant. A schoolmate asked me to follow him to the woods behind our school. It seemed normal, just a place where kids went to smoke. We were chatting casually when I turned my back to take a piss. That's when it happened. I felt a hard punch to my upper back, but it wasn't a punch. It was a knife, an 8-inch knife. The guy told me he'd stabbed me, then pulled the knife out. My survival instinct kicked in and I dropped to the ground, playing dead. If I hadn't, he might have kept going. He took my watch, a $200 fossil my mom bought me in Italy. Later, we found out he wanted to pawn it for cocaine money. Can you believe it? All this for a watch. When he ran off, I tried to get up, but something was wrong. I couldn't breathe. I stumbled out of the woods, yelling for help. My friends thought I was joking until they saw the blood. A teacher came, but she wasn't much help. She almost made me lie on my stomach, which could have flooded my lungs with blood. The pain was intense. I couldn't move much because of nerve damage. They propped me against some lockers, leaving a bloody mess on the wall. It took 25 minutes for the ambulance to arrive, the longest 25 minutes of my life. The hospital was a whole new kind of hell. In the ER, they made a big cut under my armpit to get to my lung. I was awake for this, just under local anesthetic, feeling the doctor's hands inside me, touching my lung. It's the weirdest thing I've ever felt. I still don't know why they didn't knock me out completely. My parents were freaking out. My dad wanted to get revenge with his work buddies, but Mom talked him down. I was just a regular 15-year-old kid, not into anything bad. I kept asking myself, why me? Recovery was tough. I spent weeks in the hospital and months at home. The stitches kept coming undone, so I had to go back to the ER a bunch of times. Bleeding in public? Not fun at all. Weirdly, it didn't mess me up too much mentally. Maybe I was too young to really get it. But physically, the whole area around my upper right back and arm is still numb. They also said my lung could collapse any time, which is scary. The worst part? The guy who did this was 17, so he was protected by Canada's Young Offenders Act. He didn't go to jail, just got some community service. Can you believe that? For almost killing someone? The system is messed up. It's been almost 15 years now. My lung's been okay so far, but I'll never forget that day.
Story 18.
I thought I had the perfect life. My wife and I were happy, and I loved showing off our home to friends. But one night, everything changed because of my so-called best friend. We were having an awesome time. I'd cooked a great dinner, and we were all drinking and singing karaoke. The night was full of laughter and good vibes. Little did I know, darkness was creeping in. I went to the kitchen to clean up a bit. When I came back, I leaned on the couch, feeling relaxed. My friend was behind me, but I didn't think anything of it. That's when it happened. Thunk! An explosion of pain burst through my skull. I was lost in a fog of confusion. What just happened? Then I felt it, warm, sticky blood pouring down my face. My friend had smashed a whiskey bottle on my head. I stumbled to the kitchen, trying not to make a mess. My mind was spinning. Should I grab my gun? But I couldn't think straight. The guy who just attacked me was pacing around, mumbling crazy stuff. Then, just like that, he was gone. The attack left me with a nasty concussion. Even now, I still feel the effects. It messed me up bad. You know what keeps me going, though? I've got a new goal in life. I'm gonna outlive that jerk. And when he's gone, I'm gonna have the last laugh right on top of his grave. My brother's always been a ticking time bomb. He has something called BPD, which makes his emotions go crazy. It's like he's always wearing these glasses that turn everything red when he's mad. And when he sees red, watch out. One day it happened. We were in the kitchen, and suddenly his face changed. His eyes got wide and his jaw clenched. I knew something bad was coming. Before I could even think, he grabbed a steak knife from the counter. My heart started racing. He came at me like a wild animal, slashing and stabbing. I threw my arms up to protect myself. The knife kept coming, over and over. I felt stings on my neck, but I was too scared to look. It was like time slowed down. I could see the knife flashing in the light, hear my brother's heavy breathing. He wasn't aiming, just swinging wildly. Luck was on my side that day. Most of his stabs just grazed me as I blocked with my arms, but it was close, way too close. If that knife had gone just a few inches to the left, it could have hit a big vein in my neck. I might not be here to tell this story. When it was over, I was shaken but alive. It made me realize how fragile life is and how quickly things can change. 1 minute you're standing in your kitchen, the next you're fighting for your life against someone you love.
Story 19.
I was just 18 when it happened. It was a night like any other. I was walking home from the train station after hanging out with a friend. My house was only minutes away. Easy peasy, right? Wrong. A few minutes into my walk, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Someone was following me. At first, I tried to brush it off. It's probably just someone else heading home, I thought. But my gut told me something wasn't right. I picked up my pace, my heart starting to race. Footsteps behind me got faster too. In my head, I started planning how I'd defend myself if things went south. Never did I think I'd actually need those plans. Wham! Something hit me hard on the back of my head. Pain exploded through my skull. But more than that, I felt a burning rage. Without thinking, I whirled around and attacked. We wrestled like wild animals. I fought with everything I had, but he was stronger. Before I knew it, I was on the ground, his hands around my throat. I clawed at his eyes, desperate for air. The world started to go dark. Then a voice in my head screamed, "Wake up or you will die." My eyes snapped open. With a surge of strength I didn't know I had, I let out the loudest scream of my life and fought back harder than ever. It worked. He jumped up and ran away. I lay there for a second gasping, then I bolted home screaming the whole way. My mom was already at the door when I got there. Maybe it was her mom's senses tingling, or maybe my screams woke her up. Either way, she called the cops right away. They caught the guy that same night. Here's the crazy part. It turns out he had shot me in the head. The gun misfired somehow, and the bullet got stuck in my skull without going through. Talk about luck. The guy confessed to the cops that he'd been following me for a while. He wanted to kill me and do other horrible things. Just thinking about it makes me shudder. It's been 7 years since that night. Sometimes it feels like a bad dream, but the newspaper articles about it remind me it was all too real. I'm just grateful to be alive and to have a chance to tell my story.
Story 20.
I was just a kid, maybe 15 or 16 at this party. Everything seemed normal at first. I stepped out onto the balcony for a smoke with a friend. There was already a guy out there looking kind of off. We all chatted for a bit. Then my friend went back inside. That's when things got weird. The guy started talking about how he was in the army for a while. "But they kicked me out," he said, his eyes looking wild. Then, out of nowhere, he pulls out this huge knife. My heart started racing as he handed it to me. I looked at it, trying to act cool, then gave it back. Big mistake. In a flash, he shoved me against the balcony edge. The knife was at my throat, cold metal against my skin. His face was inches from mine, his breath hot on my cheek. "You know why I wanted to join the army," he whispered. "I wanted to fucking kill people, man. People just like you." He made this awful slicing sound with his mouth, then took the knife away. And then he started laughing like it was all some big joke. I didn't stick around to see if he was kidding. I bolted inside, grabbed my girlfriend, and we locked ourselves in a bedroom. All night long, we could hear him outside. He was high on meth, punching holes in the walls and banging on our door. I slept with my own knife under my pillow, terrified he'd break in. When morning came, the guy acted like nothing happened. The only weird thing was that he'd cut his jeans into super short shorts. Looking back now, I realize how close I came to real danger that night. It's scary to think about what could have happened if things had gone differently on that balcony.
Story 21.
One night, after last call at a bar, I was with my friend who was a medic. As we were leaving, we saw a girl lying in a snowbank near a telephone pole. She had just been hit by a car. We rushed over to help her. Some people were already on the phone with. I didn't have any medical training, so I felt pretty useless, but I didn't want to just leave. The whole situation was really scary. I turned around for a second and suddenly heard people screaming. When I looked back, a minivan was speeding towards us. The others had already started to run, but I was too slow. The minivan hit me as I tried to flee. The driver then put the car in reverse, ran over me again, and then went forward and ran over me a third time. It turned out the driver was high and drunk. He had gotten into a fight with the girl's boyfriend, who I apparently looked a lot like. He thought I was the boyfriend. 9 years later, I have a ton of medical issues, and my life has pretty much been a downward spiral since then. But yeah, I guess I survived. For those wondering about the driver, an off-duty cop saw the whole thing and copied his license plate number. The driver was caught 20 minutes later and charged with attempted murder, among other things. He ended up pleading out to just 3 years in jail. He had actually killed someone else a few years before while drunk driving. How they thought that was appropriate is beyond me.
Story 22.
My husband and I live above our business. One night at 3 a.m., our alarm company called about a motion detector alert in a strange place. We thought it was a mouse but decided to check it out. My husband ended up face to face with a burglar who was climbing out a broken window. The burglar ran back inside and I called. We heard chaos in the building, crashing and smashing sounds everywhere. The burglar climbed a 10-foot iron gate and smashed through 2 sets of commercial-grade glass doors to get outside. My husband, furious, chased after him and tackled him to the ground, pinning him down. While I was narrating everything too, I was running around in my panties and tank top. I was about 15 feet behind my husband in the middle of the street when a minivan screeched around the corner. It was the burglar's girlfriend, the getaway driver. I was focused on reading the license plate, which was in a cutesy font and hard to read. She yelled, "Get off him or I'll run you over." Then she tried to. The video from the trial was horrifying. I had blocked out how close it was. She gunned the engine at me and I threw my hands up and screamed. I jumped out of the way with inches to spare. The burglar jumped into the minivan and they sped off. He bled all over my husband, yikes. Eventually, DNA and partial plate info nailed them. They're both in prison now. Trials suck. To make this clear, do not do this. Adrenaline is a powerful drug, but it's best not to fight burglars. We could have died. This was the 3rd time this guy had broken in, causing thousands of dollars in damage and inventory loss. He was a pro, doing multiple jobs a night all over the state for years.
Story 23.
When I was 14, I was in my garage petting my cat. It was November, so it was already dark by 5 p.m. Suddenly, someone opened the door behind me without me hearing. They grabbed me by my ponytail and started dragging me outside. They hit me on the head with a brick, knocking me out. They pulled me halfway around my house and then stabbed me on the left side of my stomach. This must have brought me out of my daze because my mom said she heard me scream from inside the house, where she and my brother and sister were in the kitchen. They rushed out the front door and saw me bleeding on the sidewalk. They called immediately. I ended up with 12 stitches, double layer, a severe concussion and whiplash. I didn't eat and hardly slept for a week. They never found the person who did it. This is the end. 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 This is the day. This is the end. 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 This is the day. This is the end. 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 I was traveling across Eastern Europe by train, low on money. Even though I had been warned that a woman shouldn't travel alone in 2nd class, I didn't spend extra for 1st class. I was alone in a compartment that could seat 6 people. This was a mistake. Eventually, the train stopped and a very drunk man got on. He came into my compartment and, for some reason, thought I looked like his ex-wife. He attacked me. If it weren't for the fact that this station was the border between 2 countries, I might not be here today. Border patrol from both countries were on the train. Even though I couldn't scream, the door was open, and at least 6 uniformed men jumped in and saved me. I ended up in the hospital for a while but recovered. During the trial, one of the cops asked if I wanted him and his buddies to hold the guy down while I hit him. I thought he was joking, so I said, "No, go ahead, you do it." I was joking too, but they took it seriously and were about to do it. I stopped them, but they were so angry that someone from their country would attack a young American tourist. They were furious with him because many people there depended on tourism.
Story 24.
This happened many years ago when I was a lead man at a factory. A girl started working there, and I took an interest in her. After a few months, I found out she was in a terrible, drug-fueled, abusive relationship. Every night I told her to call me and I'd come get her. Finally, after months, she called and I took her to my house. Her ex didn't take kindly to me taking her away. He spent the next 2 years harassing and threatening us. A few months after she and I got married, we went out for a few drinks. Her ex just happened to be at the bar we went to. He apologized for the threats and harassment. We were sitting outside talking with a few other people. Next thing I know, I'm on my back on the ground with someone choking me. I tried all I could to get them off, but being blindsided and them being on top of me, it wasn't easy. As I struggled to get free, everything went black, and I saw the light at the end of the tunnel. In that moment, I was certain this was the end for me. Somehow, I managed to get a better hold of the person's head and yanked them off me. We ran to the car and got away. A week or so later, my wife had been talking to everyone she thought might know what happened. Turns out, her ex had paid 2 people $50 to kill me that night.
Story 25.
When I was around 12 or 13, I took a lifeguarding course at a local pool with a friend. The class had about 16 people, mostly between 12 and 18 years old. There was one kid, probably 16 or 17, who stood out to us. He always had a solemn look, was socially awkward, and extremely quiet. We got strong serial killer vibes from him. It was just one of those instincts that tells you something isn't right. We joked about it between ourselves because we were uncomfortable around him. This went on for the first 2 hours of the 4-hour class. Then, we were asked to switch from pool instruction to a classroom and had about 20 minutes to change. While we were changing, this guy kept looking over at us. We tried not to make eye contact and just ignore it, but we were getting really uncomfortable. We were the only 3 in the changing room and wanted to leave as fast as possible. Eventually, my friend made eye contact with him. The guy screamed, "Stop looking at me," pulled a switchblade out of his swim bag and lunged at my friend. I stood there, frozen, not knowing whether to help or run. My friend blocked the initial lunge with the locker door and sprinted towards the exit, with the knife-wielding teenager chasing him. When my friend made it out of the changing room, the maniac turned and started chasing me. The pool deck floors were extremely slippery, but I wasn't worried about that. At the time, I had to run through the bathrooms, a shower room, and then onto the pool deck, the only other exit. I remember him catching up to me, but when I turned around on the pool deck, he was gone. I was half-dressed and still sprinting towards the lifeguard office. Once there, I told our instructor what happened, but he didn't believe me. He thought I was lying and picking on the kid. I insisted he find my friend with me. My friend was in the lobby with concerned parents around him. When he blocked the knife with the locker door, it had cut his forearm, leaving a 6-inch gash. The instructor called the police and the building went into lockdown. To this day, I have no idea what happened to that kid. He never came back to the class and the police didn't find him that night. It was the closest I ever came to getting killed. I don't know why he didn't stab me or if he slipped and fell. He was larger and faster than me. Now I trust my instincts more with people. They might turn out to be true.
Story 26.
When I was in college, a guy high on both meth and acid broke into my apartment. He was convinced he had lost his glasses inside. I was doing dishes when my door slammed open. Next thing I knew, he was behind me, choking me in my kitchen. As I was losing consciousness, I grabbed my roommate's acrylic bong and swung it over my shoulder into his face. The bong broke, but it didn't stop him from choking me even harder. So I swung it again. This time, because the bong had broken, I was hitting him with a 6-inch claw of acrylic glass. Afterward, his scalp and part of his cheek were hanging off the side of his face. I had essentially scalped him with a bong. I chased him out of my house. There was easily 2 feet of snow outside. He tried walking back to his house through a cemetery as a shortcut. He passed out in the cemetery. The police only found him because I called them, and they followed the blood and footprints through the snow. The most surprising part was the amount of blood. I hit him on his scalp, which doesn't have much blood compared to most of the body. But my kitchen was covered in blood. It was on my refrigerator, counter, floor, and ceiling. Cleaning it was almost as traumatic as the attack. My roommates were gone for winter break. Thank God my roommate's girlfriend came over and helped me. As for the guy, the cops couldn't charge him for 2 days because he needed blood transfusions. He was charged with assault, breaking and entering, and attempted murder. He definitely had drugs on him too. I'm not sure what he got convicted of, but he went to jail for 4 years.
Story 27.
I was doing volunteer work in Central America in a really bad area of the capital city. It was a slum built on top of the city's garbage dump. The whole place reeked of trash, and there were large metal cylinders coming out of the ground to vent the gas from decomposing garbage. One day, a fellow volunteer and I were walking down a dirt path when 2 men approached us. I'd never seen them before. They were acting strangely, but I thought they were just drunk or high. A lot of people in the area drank rubbing alcohol to get drunk since it was cheaper than beer or liquor. Over time, drinking rubbing alcohol really messed with their brains. As the men got closer, they started acting really friendly, too friendly. One of them came close to me, trying to put his arm around my shoulders. At first, it seemed like the behavior of a guy who gets happy and friendly when he's drunk. However, an alarm went off in my head and I gently but firmly pushed him away. I tried to make it seem lighthearted and playful, like, "Hey man, how's it going?" Affectionate shove. I didn't want to make a scene since I was a gringo and didn't want to seem like an ugly American. This went on over and over down the whole path. He'd get close, I'd shove him off, he'd come close again. Finally, my friend and I came to a fork in the path, and we went one way while they went another. After we got to the house of some people we knew, we told them about the 2 guys. I was so focused on protecting myself, I didn't even notice much of what was happening with the other guy. They said, "Oh, everyone around here knows him. That's his routine. He comes up to people, pretends to be friendly, puts his arm around them, then pulls out his knife and stabs them in the stomach." I was that close to getting stabbed to death.
Story 28.
When I was a kid, my sister had this friend who always gave me a bad feeling. She would pick on my little brother, but I always stepped in to stop her. I was 8, and she was 10. One day we were at a lake with a bunch of other kids, all swimming. I swam out to the deep part, even though I was still pretty small and probably shouldn't have. She started acting weird, getting closer to me and laughing in this creepy way. Suddenly, she pushed me off a wooden pole in the water. I got scared and tried to swim back, but she came up behind me and pushed me under the water. At first, I didn't realize she was trying to drown me. But after she pushed me under for the 3rd time, I had this moment of clarity. It was like everything slowed down. I relaxed, let myself sink, swam underneath her, and came up behind her. I grabbed her hair and shoved her face into the water, using my legs to keep her body down. I waited until her struggling slowed, then let her come up. I stayed in the water, silent, ready for her to retaliate, but she just looked panicked and swam back to shore. I told my sister, who already thought the girl was weird. We confronted her together and she looked really dazed. In a monotone voice she said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know it would be like that." It wasn't until I replayed those words in my mind later that I realized she meant, "Sorry I tried to drown you." I didn't understand how horrible it was until it almost happened to me.
Story 29.
One time my wife, kids and I went to church and ran into one of my wife's old flings. This guy kept following my wife and daughter around, trying to talk to them. I confronted him and told him to back off. As we were leaving, he yelled goodbye to my daughter across the parking lot. My wife forced me into the car and we left. Later, I messaged the guy on Facebook asking what his problem was. He said my wife and daughter were his friends and I had no right to tell them who to be friends with. I told him again to back off or I would call the police. A week later, I got a call from the pastor. They had to call the police on the guy because he was causing drama looking for me. When they arrested him, he had a backpack with a sawed-off shotgun, a meth pipe, and some meth in it.
Story 30.
When I was 19, I was driving through the center of Johannesburg, South Africa from Wits University during rush hour. The streets were packed with cars and people. I was winding up my window in my old Golf when 4 guys surrounded my car. Inside were me, my sister, and 3 friends. As I was rolling up my window, one of the guys reached in, switched off the ignition, and grabbed my keys, yelling, "Phones and wallets now or you die," instinctively. I grabbed his arm and held him in the car window, fighting for my keys. He pulled out and hit my arm hard twice. The second time something snapped and I let go, thinking my arm was broken. He fled and his friends followed. My friends jumped out and started chasing them. I found the keys on the road just outside my door. I couldn't drive because my arm was broken, so I jumped into the back seat as my friend returned with blood on his shirt. He jumped into the driver's seat and sped off like a madman. All of this happened within 2 minutes, at a red light with about 30 cars around us. No one stopped to help, they just drove around us. Only then did I realize I had been stabbed twice in the arm. The second stab had severed all the tendons in my forearm, and there was blood everywhere, like a Dexter splatter pattern on the seats, windows, and myself. Luckily, I had a roll of bandage in the car. I wrapped my arm and got to the hospital near my place, about 20 kilometers away, in 20 minutes during rush hour. I was in the operating theater within an hour of being stabbed. I could have been stabbed in the chest or neck, but luckily, it was just my arm. I fully recovered with an interesting scar and about 95% of my former mobility.
Story 31.
When I was a kid, I was riding my bike home from a friend's house at sunset. I passed the community pool, which had been closed for a couple of months. There was a car in the lot with a guy in it, but I didn't think much of it and kept going. I cut through the local elementary school parking lot, which had gates. About 20 yards past the gate, I saw that car pull up at the bottom. I thought it was odd, but he backed away from the gate. My spidey senses started tingling. I headed towards the teacher parking lot, my usual route. As I was about to turn the corner, I saw headlights from the parking lot. It was that guy again. I flipped my bike around and started going the long way around the school. He saw me but just got back in his car and started driving around the front of the school. I hid in some bushes, my heart pounding. He was slowly driving up and down the front of the school, keeping an eye on the teacher's lot. Another car came down the street, and he had to move his car out of the way. As soon as he did, I blasted up to the street and flew my bike into a random open garage. I hid in the garage, waiting for him to come around again, but he didn't. After a few minutes, I decided to pop my head out. Still no one. I was a few blocks from home and decided to go for it. I busted out the bike and started hauling home. Not half a block later, the guy turned the corner on me. I veered my bike into a random lawn and ran up to the front door. He was just in the street, staring at me. I gripped the front door handle, praying it wasn't locked. I saw his reverse lights flicker, and I knew he had put the car in park. I ripped the door open, ran inside, and slammed it shut. 2 old people were sitting there. I told them some guy was trying to get me. They didn't completely believe me, but didn't kick me out either. I watched the guy from their window and he was just chilling. Then the grandpa-looking dude got up from his lazy boy and opened the curtain to look for himself. When he did, the guy in the car just left. The old man said, "Looks like he's gonna leave." I said, "I'm not leaving for a bit." I hung out for 10 minutes and the creepy car was gone. I assumed he thought I called the cops. Finally, I decided to go home. This was before cell phones were common. I hopped on my bike and felt like I was going 35 miles per hour the whole way home. I got home, told my parents, and was exhausted and in shock. They brushed me off, and I was stunned that every adult acted like I was crazy. I never talked about it again because it was so traumatic. That image of him in his car while I held the door handle is permanently seared into my brain. It's still as clear as if it happened yesterday. About 18 to 20 years later, I confronted my parents about why they didn't do anything. They were like, "What are you talking about?" I explained it better than I could have as a kid, in shock. My mother broke down crying in a public restaurant when she saw how serious I was. Thankfully, I grew up and became a big guy, so my fears diminished as I could defend myself. But until I moved away from that town, I looked for that car every day. I never saw it again, but I still fantasize about what I'd do if I ever found that guy.
Story 31.
When I was 16, just 2 weeks into my first job at a smoothie shop famous among NBA fans, we got robbed. It was late, and my coworker's friends had been playing pranks on her all day. So when someone burst through the door, I thought it was just another prank. But then, I felt something metal pressed against my back and an arm wrapped around my chest. The robber gave the classic "give me all the money" line and ordered us to go into the back room, kneel down and face the wall. As I knelt there, hearing him walk towards us, time seemed to slow down. Luckily, I had been refilling juices when he came in, so the door to the back room was partially blocked by a heavy cart. The robber, probably high on something, wasn't coordinated enough to get past it, so he fled. My coworker's husband chased him and caught him. When they caught him, they found an industrial-sized pipe wrench in his fist, wrapped tightly so he could get a stronger grip when swinging. I'm so glad that cart was there. Once a year or so, I would look him up in the parish prison roster to see if he was still in jail. 1 year, he suddenly wasn't. I later found out he was named in a lawsuit for stabbing his cellmate a half-dozen times while the guy was asleep. Definitely not the nicest person. 9 years later, I'm still unpacking this incident in therapy. It's why I don't like walking around cities at night or sitting where I can't see the door.
Story 32.
I was walking home from my pregnant girlfriend's house. It wasn't a bad neighborhood, so I was just minding my own business. I passed a group of 3 or 4 guys heading in the opposite direction on the other side of the street. Something told me to look back, and right as I did, one of them had a gun pointed at the back of my head. I turned around fully and said, "Yo!" They demanded my money. I had a wad of cash, and thinking quickly, I stuck my thumb in between the bills, pulled it out, and threw it on the road. The money scattered everywhere. As they went to pick it up, I bolted. They chased me, but I ran to some guy's house. Luckily, he was cool and let me in, closed the door, and called the cops. A few weeks later, those same guys were arrested for robbery and killing someone they had robbed.
Story 33.
I'm not sure if this counts, but I was a lifeguard at one of the local beaches. One day, I was patrolling in the truck by myself when I got a call for medical aid at a condo behind the boardwalk. I grabbed everything and headed over. This was unusual, but sometimes we respond to calls off the beach since we're closer and can help until medics arrive. I knocked on the guy's door, identified myself, and entered the residence. Inside, there was a younger guy, clearly on drugs, with blood around his wrists. He just looked at me, dumbfounded. As I started to ask him what the problem was, my supervisor walked in, grabbed my shoulder, and pulled me out of the condo. It turned out the guy had called in about committing suicide and had threatened to kill anyone who entered. They shouldn't have sent me in there, and it ended up being a big deal. People got reprimanded for telling me to respond instead of waiting for the police.
Story 34.
I work in pizza, and my closing driver on Wednesdays, who is also my friend, told me a story about something similar that happened to her the other day. She was delivering for another store in our city. On one delivery, as she got out of her car to take a pizza to a customer's house, someone jumped out behind her and called out to her. The person immediately looked shocked when my friend turned around. They scrambled to put something in their hoodie pocket and said, "Oh, hey driver, haven't seen you in ages. Look at you with your new car and with a job, blah blah. Well, have a good night." Then they ran away. My friend was pretty sure the girl was going to rob her until she realized she knew the delivery driver. From what my friend says, that girl is a bit of a druggie with a messy life and all.
Story 35.
I was around 20 or 21 years old, walking home at about 3 a.m. after a night out. I was absolutely plastered from drinking so much. I was about 200 meters from my house when a hooded figure jumped out from behind a bush. He immediately pushed a knife into my stomach, grabbed my neck, and tried pulling me in. Fortunately, I was stronger and pulled away. He went to lunge at me with the knife when suddenly he stopped. He stared at me for what felt like an eternity, but was probably just a second or two. Then he said, "Holy shit, I haven't seen you in so long, my bad mate," and walked off like nothing had happened. I still don't know who he was to this day.
Story 36.
We were chilling with the bros, drinking at a park. As we drove off to leave, a car coming our way almost hit us. Our driver reacted like, "What the heck?" and I guess the other car noticed. They turned around and caught up to us at a stop sign. The other driver asked if we had a problem, and we told them to stop driving like assholes. Then their back window rolled down, and two guys in the back drew Glocks with drum magazines. We just kind of froze up at first, but then our driver pulled off hastily. Later, we found out those guys got arrested for shooting someone else that same day.
Story 37.
In my late teens, I used to buy weed from random dudes in the project's low-income housing. One day, we gave some money to a guy named 40. He took it and went inside one of the buildings. We waited in the car for several minutes and started to think he had taken our money and left. Right about that time, a car full of coked-up white dudes pulled up beside ours. Apparently, my friend owed them money. They pointed a gun at him and said that if he had enough money to buy weed, then he could pay them back. I really thought they were going to shoot us and just drive off like it was nothing. I thought I was going to pee my pants. Right about that time, 40 came back out with our weed and an even bigger gun. He scared them away, and then we went back to his apartment and smoked a blunt. What a good man. It turns out he was only selling weed because he had a 6-year-old daughter, and that was the only way he knew to give her a better life than he had. I babysat his daughter occasionally for the rest of that summer.
I really hope she got a decent childhood and that her dad stayed safe and out of jail.